will conduct today's invocation.
Will you pray with me? Heavenly Father, we welcome you. We look to your presence today to guide our conversation, to help us find strength in these challenging times. We lift up our elected officials. We lift up our mayor. We ask that you give him patience, that you give him strength, and that you allow him to lead us in a way that not only makes sense for our community, but makes sense for our nation. We ask that you open our hearts to love one another as you have loved us. And we do this in your heavenly name. Amen.
Thank you, Eric. I'd like to now welcome our guests. We will not necessarily call out every one of you that are here today, but I would like to welcome all guests to the Downtown Rotary Club to stand, please, and we can welcome you. Thank you. Thank you for being with us. I'd like to also thank South Dakota Public Broadcasting, who is live streaming today's program today. We appreciate their support and their willingness to share the subject and the topics that we will be discussing here with our program. We will not have any new member introductions. We will have some more next week and the weeks following, but in the interest of time, we thought that we would allow for some more time with our mayor today. But before we get into the program, I would like to kick off the video with this, which is one of our mentoring moment videos with Judge Schreier. Dan, if you want to tee that up for us, thank you.
The Honorable Judge Karen Schreier was the first woman appointed as a U.S. District Judge in South Dakota. However, her contributions in law...
The Honorable Judge Karen Schreier was the first woman appointed as a U.S. District Judge in South Dakota. However, her contributions in law go far beyond court cases.
In this mentoring moment, I caught up with her mentee, Elena Holstrom, who is adapting at her law firm, but already following a similar path.
So I'm going into my 4th week there, so it's barely been a month there, but great so far.
When we spoke with Elena Holstrom about a month ago, she was preparing for another day at Davenport Evans Law Firm. Since then, she's become more familiar with her workplace. Something that may ease her nerves is only being 3 blocks away from someone who mentored her and she respects.
I had the great fortune of being a law clerk for Judge Schreier, and it's more than just a job. It's the opportunity to be one of Judge's mentees.
Many federal court judges hire career law clerks, meaning they will stay longer, but Judge Schreier likes to hire term law clerks, like Elena, for a 2-year tenure. She feels it's an obligation to the local bar to train new lawyers.
When you go to law school, you learn a lot about the law, but you don't really learn how to practice. You don't learn what works and what doesn't work, how to write a brief so that it's convincing to the judge, how to make an argument to a jury. So that's what I like to do, is to help train new lawyers to be more effective when they start practicing law.
She's so good at being a teacher, but also empowering your ambitions and helping your confidence and just really pushing you to be your best. I constantly am thinking in my head, like, oh, what would Judge think about this?
Judge Schreier began practicing law in the early 80s, around the same time Sandra Day O'Connor was nominated by Ronald Reagan, and later became the first female justice on the U.S. Supreme Court.
It's especially meaningful for me, being a young female attorney, to have had the opportunity to continue to be mentored by someone who was the first female U.S. attorney and the first female U.S. District Court judge in South Dakota.
Culture has changed in 40 years, and Schreier says her law clerks are the ones teaching her about new media, groups, and music. Holstrom and 2 other clerks even helped Judge Schreier celebrate her 20th anniversary as a judge by asking a special favor of the late Justice Ruth Ginsburg.
Elena, Kelly, and Claire wrote to Justice Ginsburg and asked if I could borrow one of her jabots to wear for the day. And she sent it and said, please have her keep it, and congratulations on 20 years.
Holstrom says her mentorship has changed her professionally and personally, It has even encouraged her to pay it forward for future generations.
Now through Sioux 52, I get to mentor this fall a young girl through the Bartlett Foundation, and so I think it just will really help your own personal growth, but then will let you self-reflect and decide maybe you too want to serve as a mentor for someone.
In Sioux Falls, Sam Wright, Dakota News Now.
You can be a mentor and help others in our community. For more information, go to sioux52.org or call the Helpline Center at 211.
Club to help in that initiative. I would like to thank Tony Burke, who is the chair of the committee that is driving Sioux 52 forward, and thank Dakota News Now for helping us facilitate these mentoring moments on Dakota News. We will continue to push out those types of messages ongoing to help continue to engineer the momentum behind the initiative. Now, I'd like to get the program started. There's a lot to talk about, no doubt, with our mayor, and Mayor TenHaken. I would like to thank you for being with us today. Tony, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Welcome everybody today. Welcome everybody online. Really glad to have you all with us today. Mayor TenHaken, it's great to see you again. I think it was more than 30 months ago that we were having facilitated conversations in N.A. Sullivan Elementary talking about your run for mayor's office with 5 other candidates, and it's a long 30 months now. I guess just to start off a little bit on the personal side, anybody that goes into civic office kind of thinks they know what they're going to get themselves into. I think it's pretty arguably easy to say that, at least in my opinion, tornadoes, flooding, racial conversations that have been increased, obviously the pandemic, is not nobody could predict that coming into civic office. So how has you and your family adjusted? Because it's much different than probably what you anticipated. Yeah. And what does that look like for the family unit? How are you guys all doing?
Well, man, that's a great question to start with. First off, thanks for having me. And I got it on a point of personal privilege. I was looking across the room here. There's 2 ties in this room. And look what COVID has done. The dress code, everything, I love it. A banker and attorney. I was like, ties. So banker wearing jeans right here on a Monday. Like, this is incredible. So we're all handling COVID in our own ways right now. But, it's a great question. My kids, just as a reminder for those in your room or recap, my kids are 14. My son's 12 today. Max is 12. We just had Burger King for its birthday this morning, Burger King breakfast. And my daughter Nora is 8. So certainly in the crunch time of life, and trying to be be a present father and not be an absent father during this time is really hard because the schedule demands the last couple of years have been really intense. I would say that going into this job, you go into the job, at least for me, because I really just wanted to serve. I wanted to serve the city. I love the city, and you have to be ready for what that entails. I will agree with you that I probably couldn't have forecasted what was going to happen these last couple of years. And it's been very challenging. It's been hard on my family. It's been hard on I was just talking about this with Jill last night. It's been hard on me physically in that I used to be an athlete and run a lot, and I have chronic back pain that has been caused just really by the stress of the job. Tried everything for this back pain, and as I sit here, my back is just killing me. And it's stress. It's stress-induced. So there's all these little things that I was talking with Jill and I said, man, is this all worth it? Like, my back is killing me. I can't run as much anymore. I don't see my kids every Tuesday night. Like, what are we doing right now? This is just, it's so hard, and it's really challenging. But then you have to realize that someone's got to be doing it right now. And, God called me to do this work, and there's times I really question why that happened. And so I'm just trying to do it the best I can right now. But right now, the last 6 to 8 months have been really, really, really difficult, really hard. There's no right answers. I've seen an underbelly of our country emerge that I didn't really know existed. when you mentioned racial tensions and you mentioned the pandemic and you mentioned this very vitriolic election, those three factors have created an environment in our country that's really, really difficult. And in some ways, I think we've all questioned humanity at some point during the last 6 to 8 months, and just the collective good of people, and does it still exist? And while we know it does, it's hard to see that sometimes. And so at the end of the day, what I have to remember, and sometimes I open up presentations with this remark, but I'll list the name of three men, and I'll ask the room if they know who these three men were. And this room may know, but a lot of people don't, and they were three mayors in the last 75 years in the history of Sioux Falls, and no one ever knows that. And I always have to tell myself that no one's going to remember me in 10 years or 15 years, but I'll still be a dad, and I'll still be a husband, and so I'm not going to give away that stuff just to be a 24/7 mayor. And please don't interpret that as the dude's not giving it his all. He is, but it's one of many hats I have to wear, right now. So.
Well, I think, a little bit about your next civic person in your life, which is Nora. I think she's going to unseat you very soon from those garage talks.
She would love it. Yeah. You know what, though, in all seriousness about that?
Yeah.
Nora wants to do a video with me again. She loves doing that. And I'm just done exposing her to Facebook and the vitriolic platform that thing's become. So it's been probably a month and a half since she and I have done one of those fun things, because people just lose their minds whenever I'm visible like that. And so that's the downside of what's happening right now. Is she asked me this week, she's like, when can we do a video again? And I'm like, I'm not ready to put you in front of people because people are nasty right now. And so I've kind of had to just shelter them a little bit more than I have had to do historically.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for sharing, because I think myself and there's several people in this room that have worked in emergency services, disaster services for their whole entire career. And as I think about kind of transitioning to the professional side of this, because you've shared obviously the challenges, and as most of us will tell you, self-care is critically important, so please take care of yourself and take care of your family, because that is priority. But how did you approach it coming in, and a little bit of naivety here, with probably zero to maybe minimal experience with managing disasters?
Yeah.
Because from my experience, and most folks in the room that do that work, it's a constant learn. It's always changing. It's about adaptability. It's about pivoting. It's about getting the best information at that time and making that decision at that moment. But a week later, it might not be the right decision.
Right.
So how did you approach that with your leadership team, with your staff? How did you come into that and be able to lead through that, not having necessarily that kind of experience in your background?
Well, yeah, I didn't have, well, not only did I not have public, service background coming in here, but I never managed through some of the disasters that we've experienced the last couple of years. And what I have had to do really quick is just lean on the smart people that are in place. Two of them are here, in Regan Smith and Sandy France. So it's when you step into a role and you think just because you have the corner office and the people elected you that you're automatically an expert in something is not the case. So I think these guys, hopefully you'd agree that I just try to empower them and say, okay, tell me what I need to know and what are your recommendations, and what the team needs to see is when you make a decision, then just be definitive about it. And we talk about one experience I know will stick out to Regan. Sorry, Regan, we'll talk about the tornado sirens. Let's talk about that for a second. So we had that issue when we had those tornadoes, and the sirens didn't go off in the majority of the city. And tornado sirens are meant to, for lack of a better term, you hit a big red button and they all go off. And in the chaos of that evening, and 3 different funnel clouds come in the city, and the National Weather Service calls our Metro and says, hey, there's a tornado spotted in city limits, sound the sirens, and Metro says, okay, where at? And the Weather Service says, southwest. Well, through that, they didn't know, are you telling me where the tornado is, or where you want me to sound the sirens? And so in that chaos, the dispatcher, who's an incredible dispatcher and wasn't even trained in how to do this, had to go into the back end of the software and deactivate parts of town and just flip the sirens in certain parts of town. The guy should probably get a raise for figuring out how to do that on the fly. Well, that's why the sirens didn't go off in the whole part of the city. And when we were at a press conference that morning, I remember we were back in the EOC and we're like, what are we, the media is going to be hounding us. Like, why didn't the sirens go off, Mayor? Why didn't the sirens go off? And Regan was giving me some advice. I remember back there and decided, you know what, we just need to own it. It's just human error. We're going to go out. We say, listen, they didn't go off. It's my mistake. Metro reports to me. We're going to figure it out. We did. We have since overridden the ability for them to ever do that in the system. And so I share that story because I have to, one, you accept the praise when something goes well, but when something goes wrong, obviously I had nothing to do with that, but I accept the blame for that stuff too. Work with my team, we fix it. And so what the city needs to know, and I stress this a lot, is we just have such great leadership in this city. I mean, such great leadership. And we've invested a lot. I think we'll talk about this maybe in succession planning and the culture that it isn't dependent on who's in the mayor's office. So that there's a culture of excellence in succession planning that just lives on, and it's kind of election proof, you know. And so that's what we've really spent a lot of time on the last couple of years, is developing those leaders who give amazing advice on disaster preparedness and how we respond when something bad happens.
Awesome, fantastic. So a couple of things just to close out this kind of portion of the conversation. What's your message to the community to continue to unite? You know, we've talked about One Sioux Falls. We've been carrying that mantra now since you stepped in. We know there's fatigue on everybody right now. There's, whether it's the economy, whether it's our people as individuals, whether it's our congregations, there's just a lot of fatigue. So what's your message about unity?
Well, one, I'm glad that this election season is past, okay? Probably no one in this room was looking forward to that more than me, just because of how divisive that became, you know, in Sioux Falls. What's interesting about Sioux Falls versus the rest of South Dakota, we are truly a melting pot. We have all kinds of religions. We're probably 50-50 R's and D's. Like Trump won Sioux Falls like 50.46% or something like that. We are a split community on a lot of levels. You don't see that in the rest of South Dakota. So how we have to do things here is different than maybe even how, you know, the governor has to govern, because she governs a red state. I govern a purple city, right? So it's very, very different here, what we have to do here. So in terms of unity, I have really been encouraging people to start to, as simple as this sounds, and this is why I'm so bullish on mentorship, start to expose yourself to people and to situations that will broaden your worldview, okay? For instance, focus group of one. During the elections, me as a Republican, I got all my information from CNN, okay? And I did that because, like, I want to see I don't want to get in this echo chamber of the same beliefs and get all riled up. And so started to get information from different sources so I could understand the other side of this. I started to intentionally sit down with people who I disagreed with vehemently on stuff, but invited them into my office to have conversations with them. And once people get out from behind their keyboard, they're so different, okay? But man, we call them keyboard commandos in City Hall. They're incredible. And one just happened this last week. This lady who's, man, is she hard on me constantly. And she's kind of got a following in the city. And I just reached out and I said, would you just come meet with me? Because you've never even met with me before. I don't even know you. And we had a great meeting. We disagreed at the end. She wants me to mandate mass. I'm not going to do that. And so we had this disagreement. But her persona online, so different than who she is in real life. And so I need people just to be open to having conversations with people who don't think like you, look like you, act like you. And for some reason, we've lost that. And it's like, if we disagree, that means I hate you. And it's like, no. Disagreement doesn't equal hate. And unfortunately, it seems like it's gotten that point. So we got to figure out how we walk that back. Mentorship's a great way to do that, because if you're mentoring someone, it's going to expose you to a world that you maybe aren't in, someone you who has a different circumstance than you. It will hopefully open your eyes to something that maybe you would never have been exposed to.
Excellent, thank you. Let's talk about maybe a little celebratory comment now, a little celebratory thought. What do you see as your proudest accomplishment to date in office?
Hands down, the team we built. I mean, what people maybe sometimes forget is, politics aside, the mayor's the chief executive for a 1,300 employee organization. I have 14 direct reports. So I'm still like an executive for a huge company with 3 bargaining units. And so even if I didn't have to deal with the city council and all the public stuff, you still have this huge company you're trying to run. And you cannot do that without just a crack team. So from I'll call a few people out. I mean, our public health director and Jill Franken, couldn't be doing this without her. My city attorney, lead city attorney, I'm Stacy Koistra, has kept the city out of a ton of lawsuits during this time, because a lot of the stuff cities and states are doing right now under the guise of government is not legal. Okay, and so he has kept the city from getting sued multiple times. My finance director, Sean Pritchett, we paid off $31 million in debt last month during a pandemic. Incredible leader. Jeff Eckhoff, leading our planning. If you know Jeff, man, that guy's a home run. I got a new director of innovation technology, and Mike Grigsby from Kansas City. Our chiefs, Matt Burns with police and Brad Goodrow with fire. Unbelievable dudes. I mean, they got incredible hearts. They're respected by their teams. And then if you know Mark Cotter, which I know a lot of you do, Cotter is the best. I mean, he is a humble leader, and we have some of the best infrastructure for a city of our size because of his planning and our parks and Don Carney. I mean, we just got such a great team of people. So I would say I'm most proud of that team. Some were there when I got there, some we brought in, and this team gels like no team I've ever been a part of, because we had some legacy people, some new people, and we had to put them all together and stir them up, and they're gelling really, really well.
Awesome. Fantastic. Let's shift gears and talk about COVID. We'll kind of move into that conversation. We know that was going to be a topic of conversation. Obviously, it's kind of carrying our lives day in and day out nowadays. So, as you're well aware, November 3rd was the first reading of a mask mandate, and you kind of already referenced that. So let's talk a little bit about the ordinance and what it's proposed to do, and then you've already stated your position, but where do you think we go from here depending on what happens with that mask mandate?
Well, the mask mandate would be a version of what a lot of cities and states have done, which would require masks in public spaces when you can't social distance. So even by me just saying that, you can see all the squishy elements to that. And few reasons I have problems with a mask mandate. One would be the compliance in this city. It's been pretty good. You ask the healthcare systems where they're seeing a lot of patients. About 20-25% of their patients are from Sioux Falls. 75-80% are from outside of Sioux Falls. We've been having pretty good compliance for a long time, but the Kimballs and the Rock Rapids and the Lavernes, and they haven't been as good. And so I said at a press conference the other day, I said, I'm the only mayor of 80 square miles. I can't control 500,000 people. I'm done. And the mayor's done. He's tapping out. What kind of leadership is this? Like, no. I'm done trying to be a kind of mini governor in this whole region. I can't control Laverne and Rock Rapids. I can't control that Iowa doesn't have these mandates, and I can't control what's happening on the reservation. And it's interesting that people call on me a lot to do these things that are just not in my purview, my control. So I'm pushing the compliance. Wear masks, do this stuff. But the additional compliance we may get from a mandate is not, in my opinion, worth all the challenges it's going to create. One of which is an enforcement challenge. Of all the city employees, I think my police officers have had the hardest year of anybody. I'm not going to stick a mask mandate that they need to enforce on top of them right now. It's just, I'm not going to do that. FOP, the police unions, are vehemently against it, and I support those men and women. I said, I'm not going to do this to you right now. I also see, I just got a list today of the top 10 MSAs in the country which have the highest 7-day case growth per capita, and every single one has had a mask mandate for months. And so this isn't, if people think in a red state with some elected officials who question the efficacy of masks, that it's going to move the needle a lot. It maybe will move it a little bit, and it will create a lot of challenges on the other side. And so that's the hard part for us as elected officials, is we have to make decisions and look at the totality of the picture. And a healthcare employee, because I hear from a lot of healthcare people, like, just mandate it. We see these patients every day. We know. It's like, yeah, you just have to think about healthcare. I have to think about the economy and the police officers and the political ramifications of this and all these other elements that, while a seemingly simple mask mandate doesn't seem like a big deal, it is. And so I am not intending to support it if I am asked to vote on it. I'm hoping, I've always told the council, I wish you could get to stuff where I don't have to get drug into it. I don't think they've done that here, and so I'm probably going to get put on the hot seat tomorrow night, and if it's a split, I will vote to not support it. But I will continue to preach the gospel of hand hygiene, which we don't require before you walk into a store. Mask mandates, we won't require, but I'll push masking, I'll push the social distancing. We'll do all this stuff that is going to be important to slowing the spread of COVID.
So appreciate the context, because I think, as we all know, there's been lots of spinning out of the quote from the press conference. So let's talk about leadership a little bit more. There's a lot of conversation around emotional intelligence, and at least from my perspective, when I think about the comments that were made, it showed vulnerability. Why is it that our society looks at leaders and do not expect them to show vulnerability?
Well, I don't know, because I'm pretty just real. When I was a little bit vulnerable because I got asked a really dumb question by a media journalist, in my opinion. And his question basically said, so after 8 or 9 months, you're just left to begging people to comply with wearing a mask. That's where you're at. And I'm like, man, you're disregarding our unemployment, how many people we've kept housed, like all these things. If leadership is simply telling people they have to do this, then yeah, I'm a terrible leader. I mean, if that's what leadership means to you right now. So I have no problem taking off my mayor mask and just showing people I'm frustrated. We're all frustrated. Who isn't pissed off right now about a variety of things? Elected officials are no different. My kids got to wear masks, and we got to deal with this. I haven't been to my church in a couple months, and, we're all frustrated and annoyed. And I think that's okay for people to see that, because I think sometimes there's a lack of empathy for this situation that, in my opinion, we've maybe seen at the federal level. Lack of empathy for the people that have lost their lives in this, and people need to see elected officials who maybe show some empathy and some frustration and some, compassion for what's happening in people's lives right now.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Let's shift gears, talk about civil discourse. As you know, as Rotarians, we have the 408 test right here, right, which is really true values. And we think it fosters civil discourse and really great conversations. We've had a series of conversations about racial equity in our city and beyond. And so really want to understand from your perspective, what does a civilized political dialogue look like? What does that mean? And how do we continue to foster that civil discourse within our city? And you touched on it already, but how do we continue to do that? What do we need to do as a community, as leadership, to continue to focus on that?
Well, yeah, I talked about it a little bit earlier. It's funny because 2 of my former colleagues are here in the front at Click Rain, and I started a company in 2008 that around like social media, and I can't stand it anymore. And I think social media for politics is extremely divisive, and I haven't had a personal Facebook account in 2 years. And people will say, oh, did you see so-and-so had a baby? Or did you see what they posted? I'm like, no, I didn't. And my life is awesome. It's great. And I'm on this delete Facebook account kick right now because I just don't see a lot good coming from that other than broken relationships and anger and so forth. So that's one thing I think people need to do, is spend less time on the computer and on the internet. So as a guy who started a digital company, at least on that topic, but secondly, I'm just going to double down on that point of pick on myself. My social circle is very homogenous. Okay, a lot of white people in my social circle. I've had to start to figure out, how can I surround myself more with people who don't look like me? And that's not because I have a bias, but maybe I do. Maybe I do have a bias, and I don't even know about it, right? And have you ever stopped to think about what your own social circles look like? Do you hang out with people who don't look like you and talk like you and eat like you and go to the same church? And I think once you start being intentional about that, you really start to get a worldview that's much more comprehensive and broad. Doesn't mean you have to change your beliefs, but it does mean, okay, now I can see why people were so mad about this issue on the ballot. I've never thought about it like that. I've never thought about this issue like that. And so just broadening our minds, as simple as that sounds, and it starts with just being able to have broader social circles than maybe we're typically used to.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you. You mentioned Director Mike Grisby. I had the opportunity to sit with him just a little over a week ago. He's our new Director of Innovation and Technology. He joined us in April of 2020. Very interesting conversation talking about smart cities and what that might mean to our community moving forward. Also, in September, the city received a $50,000 gift from Midco, talking about the launch, the task force group around IDEA, which is the Inclusive Digital Equity Alliance. Explore with us today the vision of Smart City. What is digital equity, and where does Sioux Falls land when it comes to digital equity?
Well, I'll start with the latter part about digital equity. So digital equity was kind of on my radar before COVID, but it really, rose to a fever pitch once kids had to start working remote. So when we talk about equity, a lot of times when you hear the term equity, we think racial equity. And there's economic equity and digital equity. It's making sure people have equal access, to the same things. And digital equity, there's about a quarter of our residents in this city who do not have access to high-speed internet in their home, okay? Now, a lot of those are probably by choice, okay? But there's definitely a lot, it's not by choice. And so you ask teachers how it went with remote learning. I especially asked the Terry Redmonds, Annie Sullivans, the Washington teachers, how remote learning went with some of their students. And for some of those kids, it was a huge challenge. Some of them, they just didn't hear from. They just fell off the face of the earth, some of these high school kids. And it really highlighted the fact that we need a more equitable community when it comes to internet access. I go to Haiti every year in January, and those people in Haiti, they make less than $1 a day. We go visit these huts and go up in the mountains, and they will be cooking something over a charcoal stove in the thatch hut, and they got a solar charger plugged into a cell phone. They have nothing, but they need connectivity. That's how important it is. And it's like here, it's the same thing. It's like water. It's like a utility. You need internet. And some people still don't think of it as like a fundamental need like water and electricity. I do, to figure out where the Social Security office is and how you're going to do your homework and how are you going to access the information you need to live your life. So the point of that group is to study what do we have to do to make a more equitable Sioux Falls in terms of connectivity. Is it more Wi-Fi hotspots? Is it city-wide Wi-Fi? Is it internet like a utility where the city provides some sort of access and it's on a utility bill and you can get grants, or not sure what that will look like yet? That's what that task force is going to figure out. Which kind of blends into the topic of smart cities, is simply using technology to make a city that's smarter, to services that are more accessible, whether that be responsive traffic signals, adaptive traffic signals, to we're looking into gunshot detection software right now, which can tell the difference between a gunshot, a firecracker, and a car backfire, triangulates that it's a gunshot, it instantly dials Metro, and it allows response times to be a lot faster and get to perps a lot quicker who have maybe discharged a gun. So technology like that uses technology, and specifically smart city connectivity with the internet, to provide services to our residents. And that's why the 5G initiative I'm really bullish on, because when you get 5G in a city, the possibilities really start to become endless with autonomous cars and all the stuff that you can do with interchanges and lights and everything else.
Well, I had a similar experience traveling to Zambia, Africa, and nobody was wearing shoes there, but everybody had a cell phone, so seek to understand. And when we found out was they want to have that entrepreneurial spirit. They want to be connected because down the road, then they can buy all the shoes they want.
Right, right.
So really interesting because when we walk into those communities and we have that lens of, well, they should be having shoes. Why should they have a phone?
Mm-hmm.
They're looking long term. They're not looking in the immediacy. Not that immediate gratification. They're looking for long term. So great conversation. Well, this is a great opportunity to spin back to Sioux 52, the mentoring initiative that was launched in January of this year. It's a partnership with the City of Sioux Falls, with the Downtown Rotary Club, 2-in-1, the nonprofits that are doing mentoring programs in the business community. Talk a little bit more about the importance of mentoring now, and you've touched on a little bit, but let's go a little deeper, especially during these times of COVID and what's going to happen a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now.
Well, first off, you guys need to know in Tony, in your Rotarian, this guy's been a huge champ for Sioux 52. He has been awesome. Yeah, give him a hand. He communicates tirelessly with our office on this, but I love the example you showed with Judge Schreier, because a lot of times we think of mentorship being like second, third, fourth grader, I'm going to eat lunch with the kid, and that is mentorship. But that is mentorship. And I'll give you a very real example. I had a guy, a Eritrean first-generation immigrant, come to my office about a month ago maybe, and he wanted to buy a restaurant. And he approached another, a white guy, about buying his restaurant. The guy was ready to get out, sold it to him, and sold his beer and wine license to him with it, okay? Well, this Eritrean guy thought he was buying a liquor license. He sold the beer and wine license for $37,000, okay? And those are about $250 to buy. So he opens his restaurant, he gets a violation because he's trying to serve liquor. Well, you can't serve liquor. You don't have a license. So I paid $37,000. He came into my office, he had to close his restaurant because he got fleeced for $37,000. And he basically was saying, I just need someone to help me run my business. I need someone to show me how to pay taxes, and I wish I had someone who could have helped me with this. And that's mentorship. I would have loved to get to that guy a little earlier, and I could have connected him with any of the smart people in this room who could say, could you just help this dude out and help him open this business? And so that's mentorship, and that's where this group can play a role. And so mentorship just has so many opportunities in our city, and as the diversity of our city continues to evolve, I see it being more and more important. There's a rise in crime in our city right now. Some of that's COVID related, a lot of it's narcotics related. A lot of that rise in crime, I'm seeing there's a lot of juveniles, okay? Juveniles who, they're running free. They got no one holding them accountable. And I just think, okay, what could have happened if that kid got hooked up with a mentor 5 years ago who was holding this kid accountable? Could a difference have been made? And it's the difficult part for a lot of business people in this room is it's hard to put an ROI. We talked about this earlier when we were talking about mentorship. You're like, how will we measure success if we're moving the needle? It's like, in some ways, you may never know. You may never know if that kid graduated from high school because you mentored him, or would he have done that anyway if you weren't in his, you don't know. And you got to be comfortable knowing that. But I do know when he graduated, he didn't do something dumb. So whether you had a part of that or not, that's called, it's success. So really appreciate the work that this club has done to get on board with this, because I think it can really transform our city in terms of being the united way of time. That's what we kind of be calling it. We're very good with money in Sioux Falls. We raise a lot of money, but we need to give more of our time in this community, and I think this can do that.
Give us an update on the state of the economy here in Sioux Falls.
Well, the economy is quite strong right now. We have 3.4% unemployment. National average is closer to 8. Obviously, we had a big land sale to Amazon during the pandemic. That whole deal came together during the pandemic. It wasn't like it was 2 years in the making. It happened. In some ways, it seemed like it took forever. In some ways, it was really quick. There are phones ringing and businesses interested in South Dakota and specifically interested in Sioux Falls right now, and some huge opportunities on the horizon. Workforce and housing will be the biggest challenges to that. That's typically the biggest issue we have with recruiting businesses is our workforce and our housing. Businesses overall, we haven't seen a ton of business closures as a result of COVID. Hospitality industry is in the tank, as you know. Hotels are tough. Our Premier Center is bleeding cash, that whole campus out there. We got the debt service on top of what it takes just to keep the lights on, so that industry is tough. But overall, this economy is strong. And I mentioned that we paid off $31 million in debt last month. That's going to free up $2.5 million in the front years, up to $8 million on the out years of additional cash that we're going to be able to use in our CIP for city projects. So it was a very Dave Ramsey-esque moment for the city, like to pay down that debt, you know, to free up the cash for the out years. So economy is good right now. And now with the news of potential vaccine, we just talked about that this morning, and them actually showing good results with this Pfizer vaccine and high level of efficacy. That's going to give a new level of consumer confidence where there is pent-up demand for people to spend money. People are ready to spend money. People are ready to go on trips. They're just the door hasn't been open. I was at an auction Saturday night. Auction I go to every year. Record-setting auction by far. And the bid stuff was getting, I'm like, people are ready to spend some money right now. I know they are. And it was a good indicator of me that money's out there. People are ready to spend it once they can just get the consumer confidence back.
Excellent. So let's, we just completed the election. Let's talk a little bit about Amendment A and IM 26 and the legalization of marijuana. We hosted a conversation on October 5th here at the club, a panel discussion about both of these initiatives. Both have passed. So let's look in the crystal ball a little bit, which is probably going to be a little cloudy, but what do you think is in store for the city of Sioux Falls when it comes to dispensaries?
Well, election was Tuesday. Wednesday, before 9, we had 3 dudes come into City Hall wanting to buy their weed licenses. I'm not even kidding you. And they weren't the most entrepreneurial looking dudes you've ever seen either. So, I mean, we have until July of next year to figure this out. And we'll see. I don't know what the future is going to look like. I personally was not a proponent of this. I've never met someone who I felt was smarter, more intelligent because they smoke marijuana. I was for medicinal. I think that it's time. A lot of states have done that, but I think we're going to look back someday, gospel according to Paul, and regret the day that this went into law. And that's my personal opinion. And I'm good friends with John Sutherland. John was the Attorney General in Colorado, passed Colorado. He's now the mayor of Colorado Springs, and we keep in touch on this. And he'll tell you, he painted the picture of how this would pass. He's like, they'll lump it together with medicinal. All the marketing will be about medicinal. People, voter confusion. Voters will vote for both because they think it's kind of one and the same, and you need both to get medicinal. And playbook, I mean, he called it 3 years ago when I first talked to him about this when I was campaigning. So now we have to figure out what that means for Sioux Falls. We have meetings set up with our police officer, or with our police chief, or with the South Dakota Municipal League. I got a call with them this week to figure out what it means for municipalities. We have home rule charter here, which gives us some leeway. So we could look at not allowing dispensaries in the city of Sioux Falls. I think that would be a real big fight, but it's a question of is that the right thing to do or not? And a lot of people will say to me, hey, they sign their emails, because I'm getting a lot of emails these days, a voter who votes in every election, okay? Or I'm not going to vote for you when you run for higher office. And what I always love is, what makes them assume I would ever run for higher office, or that I would even rerun, given what's happened the last 3 years? So I have to do what I feel is right. And if fighting this is right for the city, I wouldn't do that because, it may not get me reelected. I don't care. I'm doing what I feel is right. And the challenge is for people, it's hard to think of a politician who would be willing to just let go of their seat, because it's like, I don't care if I do this again, because I got a whole nother life in the private sector, go do something else. So I want to do what's right for the community. And I feel in my heart of hearts that Amendment A is not right for this community. It's not right for the city. And I'm very bummed that passed, but you also have to accept the voice of the voters and see what options you have now that it is passed.
Excellent. So one more question, and then we'll start fielding some questions from the group. You've pushed some really creative things in your leadership so far. Let's go back to the beginning of your leadership and a pretty contentious issue from the community, probably a little bit of lack of understanding when you decided you wanted to hire a chief cultural officer. You brought in Raina DeBoer as your chief cultural officer in January. As we know, some of the conversation was around you have 250 plus staff that are probably going to retire. There'll be a lot of transition and change there. So can you talk a little bit about your insights onto the employees, your team, the bigger team now, and where they're at versus when you started bringing Raina in and what she was doing? And what do you think of the recent findings that came out of the research from where you started to where you're at today? Sure. And where do you think it's going to go?
Yeah, well, when I did start, I found out quickly we didn't have any succession planning program at the city. We didn't really have employee development programs in the city, at least aggressive ones. And we had the, I know people don't like this term, but they call it the gray wave of boomers that are retiring out, and you have this knowledge gap that's leaving. In October, for instance, alone, last month, 15 retirements in the city of Sioux Falls, average tenure of about 25 years. So that is centuries of experience that just walked out the door, and that was just 1 month. And so seeing that coming, I'm like, okay, I got to start investing in leadership development programs and being intentional about succession planning. And I'm no longer, when my employees are discontent, they have all kinds of options. They could go work at Midco and Salmons and Sanford. They have all kinds of options. How am I making the city of Sioux Falls an employer where they want to stay and they want to work here and they appreciate the benefits and the pension and the mission of what we're doing? So Raina spent a lot of time doing that, including implementing employee engagement tools and employee engagement software programs where we're able to see little embers maybe in different departments where we need to do some work, where it's like, okay, in this department, they're ranking really low on communication and vision, which means we're not communicating with that department very well, or their leadership's not, and they haven't bought into the vision. So it tells us the work we have to do in that specific spot to keep our retention high and turnover low. And it's been an absolute home run. And it's easy for me to say that. I can speak to two people in the room. What's happened to the culture in the city of Sioux Falls just in the last 2.5 years? It's a different place. And that's important because we have a lot of jobs we need to fill in the next 4 or 5 years. And I need people who want to look at the city. That's why we have a new logo, things like that, and say, that's a cool place. I'd like to work there. They got great leadership. They got great culture. They invest in their employees. So it's been a kind of a passion project of mine.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, let's open up the floor for questions. Anybody want to step up to the mic? By all means, the mayor's ready to answer.
Sweet.
Wow. You answered all their questions.
Mayor TenHaken, Paul Amundson, physician here in Sioux Falls, member of Downtown Rotary. My question, unfortunately, is surrounding the COVID, just because it's still foremost in our minds. We're certainly maybe halfway through this at best, given some of the data we're seeing on vaccines and when they'll be available for the general public. Give a guide for your office's planning, from now until then being time where, I think, vaccines are readily available for the general public. We have better treatment options. Hospitalization, positivity rates are way down. What do you have in place for that type of continual planning going on?
Sure. Thanks for the COVID question, Paul. Well, we just talked about this morning about the vaccination schedule for, kind of some of the first people in line will be first responders, healthcare people, so forth. And by the end of the year, I'm pretty confident that we'll start to see people getting vaccines in those fields. I rely real heavily, very heavily. People say, who do you trust? Who are the experts you listen to in this? I listen to the chief medical officers at our two healthcare systems and the executives, Dave Felichek and Paul Hansen, at those two. I don't listen to national talking heads or Dr. Fauci or anybody like that, because They don't know the dynamics here, the political dynamics, the capacity here, the fact we only have 3 tertiary care hospitals in the whole state, the reservation dynamics, and so forth. So what they continue to reinforce to me is that they're in the very early innings of a very comprehensive surge plan. So remember that early on, back in May and June, there was preparations being made for up to 600 COVID-specific patients being hospitalized in Sioux Falls, okay, which is why we were in a really challenging spot. Well, we have today about 120, maybe, or excuse me, 220. God, I'm looking right in that light. I'm gonna stop looking at you, Paul. We have about 220 in the hospital for COVID. So we have to continue to trust on the leadership of those organizations to say, okay, where do we sit? How do we sit? They are very stressed. They're very taxed. Those healthcare employees are extremely taxed. And we have to be sensitive to that. But I will say that there seems to be a wave that's also happening right now in the upper Midwest. If you look at those top 10 cities that I mentioned, it's Minneapolis, it's Grand Forks, Fargo, Bismarck, Des Moines, Omaha. We're like number 15. There's a wave happening in the upper Midwest, just like you saw it on the coast. So I feel not great about where we sit, but I'm confident in the surge plan, in the vaccination schedule, and some of it in South Dakota at the state level, we've kind of charted the course we're going to take with this, right? So we are going to allow for personal freedom, right? And personal freedom means different things to different people. And some people are comfortable with that level of responsibility, some are not. But that's the approach South Dakota's taken. So we at the local level have to work within that framework, if that makes sense.
Further questions?
Steve Sikorsky, thanks for being here, Mr. Mayor. The rumor mill has Tesla division, a division of Tesla coming to Sioux Falls. Have you heard that rumor, or is it fake news? And when will Trader Joe's be in Sioux Falls?
I've not heard a rumor about Tesla. That'd be great. So, but I will say there are some large companies that are looking at Sioux Falls right now. And to our forefathers that had the vision to invest in Foundation Park, any of your businesses that invest in Forward Sioux Falls in that campaign, the Development Foundation work, we're now starting to see the dividends of that investment pay off, okay? So Trader Joe's, you know what? They'll come when the market is ready and they see a market here. So they're not here yet, but don't forget, I got Chick-fil-A here, okay? Actually, I had nothing to do with that, but I'll take that.
Mayor TenHaken, Joni Johnson. First of all, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for being our mayor. I know it has to be tremendously hard, and I think I said no less than 1,000 times this year. Thank God I'm not an elected official, because I'm sure it feels like you can do nothing right. In vain of that, can you give us some ways that we can support you, those of us who believe that you're doing great work and want to lift you up sometimes? I'm sure it's really hard to ask for people to lift you up, but if there's ways that we can, we would like to. Secondly, is thank God 2020 is getting near the rearview mirror. What are you looking forward to in 2021? What are things that we can help support you on in 2021 and get excited about, not COVID related?
Great questions. Well, on the first one, I would love to see support for our healthcare workers right now. So you can support me by supporting them. Because I feel that our healthcare workers feel forgotten by elected officials. Because when I say I'm against a mask mandate, healthcare workers take that as a slap in the face. I don't see them and notice them, and they're feeling very beaten down. So I don't know if there's any ideas in this club of how you can support our healthcare workers, but they need to have continued support. Second, and you've done this already, continue to support our law enforcement, okay, who have such hard jobs right now. And I have a very soft spot in my heart for law enforcement. And so when you support the work that they're doing and indirectly is a statement that, hey, the city has taken the right approach because we appreciate our law enforcement. Unfortunately, we live in a culture where supporting law enforcement and wearing a button that says, I back the police, would just doesn't fly. You can wear a button for the other side of that issue or a different issue, and that's okay. And that's what's really hard for cops to see that and hear that. So what I'm looking forward to in 2021, that's a great question, because a lot of the last 2 years has been just reactive work. I haven't been able to get momentum on Sioux 50. I haven't been able to be inside of school since March, okay, and talk to kids about mentoring. So I need to be able to get back and start being proactive with the mentorship initiative. We have a lot of 5G small cells we're rolling out next year. I'm really excited about that. We're going to have now both AT&T and Verizon 5G small cells that are coming to our market. So I'm looking forward to that. I also am excited in 2021 about some of these economic development wins I think are going to shake loose, including some really cool conversations happening with Dakota State in Madison and what they're doing with cybersecurity and all the eyeballs on them. Madison can only hold so much. So Sioux Falls is a logical partner for their work, the extension of that work. So it'll be cool to see what 2021 brings with them. So thanks for your kind comments.
Well, that's a great way to conclude the conversation. So on behalf of the club, Mayor, certainly thank you for your leadership. Thank you to your family for the commitment they're making. As we talked about at the very beginning, I don't think anybody could predict it walking into a civic office, no matter whether you're local, county, state, or federally, walking into this kind of environment and are probably in most recent times, probably if ever, as an environment. So thank you to your family as well. And I'll turn it back over to Jason. President Herbold.